right, we have Mrs. Dunlop's class with their pair of fables. Get my glasses on here. And we'll be ready to roll. Excellent audience. Hands on the knees. And we start. Once upon a time, some frogs hopped across a farmyard. The frogs said, "We're hungry." The frogs passed the barn door. The frogs said, "Flies and spiders, yum, yum, yum." The frogs opened the barn door. In the barn there were flies. Go, go, go. In the barn there were spiders. After all that eating, the frogs said, "We're thirsty." The frogs hopped through the barn. They saw a pail on the floor and they said, "There's a pail with lots of milk." The frogs hopped into the pail of milk and drank it. But frogs can only drink so much milk. They tried to climb out of the pail, but they said, "The sides are too steep. We can't climb out." The milk was too deep, so the frogs couldn't jump out either. They were stuck in the pail. The frogs kicked and kicked and kicked in the milk, and they said, "We'll drown if we stop. Don't give up." The frogs kicked and kicked and kicked in the milk, and they said, "We'll drown if we stop. Don't give up." The frogs kicked and kicked and kicked in the milk, and then we kicked the milk into butter. The frogs sat on the floating cake of butter with one leap. They freed themselves from the pail and they said, "At last we're free. What a fuss. Let's tell the world what happens to us. Whether you're old or just a young pup, when things look bad, just don't give up." And that's the first story. Okay, so have a seat. And now we'll hear the original story that Mrs. Dunlop's class came up with based on that fable. Here we go. Once upon a time, a king and a queen lived in a fine castle. The royal children played hide and seek. Ready or not, here I come. The royal grandmother rocked in a jeweled rocking chair. Decorating the castle were snakes. The children's pets were bunnies. When they had guests, the bunnies warmed people's feet if they forgot to bring slippers. The royal guard dogs barked when anyone came to the castle. There was someone else who lived with the family. It was a wizard, a warm, wonderful wizard who happened to be invisible. In the village near the castle was a park with pigs, bugs, hamsters, and raccoons. Children from all corners of the kingdom went to the park to play. When the children played, bugs buzzed with delight. When the children played, raccoons thumped their tails in delight. When the children played, hamsters squeaked in delight. When the children played, pigs snorted with delight. And the warm, wonderful wizard watched and smiled, but no one could see that because the wizard was invisible. But the best part of the kingdom was the candy shop. The candy shop. Candies of every color of the rainbow were there, and you could get whatever kind you wished. That's because the candy shop was run by people who used magic. There were fairies, there were elves, there were trolls, there were gnomes. They didn't make the candy by hand, they made it when they used magic. You see, the magical folk had a magic pot. It looked like an ordinary empty metal soup pot. But when they said the magic words, candy pot, click, the pot shivered and shook. It rattled and rolled. Then the pot settled down and hummed. and the pot started filling with candies of every kind and color. When the pot was full, the magical folk would say, "Candy pot, flop!" and the pot would stop making candy. Everyone came to the candy shop to eat the beautiful candy. The children and the park animals ate all that candy. The magical folk ate all that candy. The royal family and the menagerie ate all that candy. No one could see the warm, wonderful wizard smiling because the wizard was invisible. Everyone in the kingdom was happy. Well, almost everybody. Surrounding the kingdom was a forest, and living in that forest were wild animals. The wild animals were jealous of the people in the kingdom. They were jealous of the animals in the kingdom. They were jealous of the people who used magic. Except for the warm, wonderful wizard, because the wizard was invisible. The wild animals were jealous of anyone who went to the candy shop because they could not go there too. Wild animals were not welcome. The wild animals didn't want the people and animals to eat all that candy. They wanted to eat all that candy. They didn't want others to enjoy it. They wanted it all for themselves. So they decided to steal all that candy. The flying animals flew to the shop to count windows and doors. It was a warm day and the windows were open. Inside the shop, the animals saw all that candy. The flying animals said, "We are going to steal all that candy." They were about to leave when something happened. The fairies, elves, trolls, and gnomes said the pot's magic words, "Candy pot, flip." The flying animals saw the candy pot shiver and shake, rattle and roll. They heard it hum. The animals saw the candy pot fill up the pot. They said, "We're also going to steal all that candy." They were so excited as they flew back through the forest to tell everyone the animals were very greedy. The candy on the shelves was not enough for them. They would eat the candy on the shelves and then make lots more with the candy pot and steal that for themselves. They started to chant, "We want candy, we want a lot, from the shelves and from the pot." That night, the wild animals sneaked out of the forest and they said, "We want candy, we want a lot, from the shelves and from the pot." They crept through the village saying, "We want candy, we want a lot, from the shelves and from the pot." They crept to the candy shop saying, "We want candy, we want a lot, from the shelves and from the pot." The fairies, elves, trolls, and gnomes heard the noises around the shop. They got scared and escaped through a secret underground passage. They had a secret escape route because they were people of magic. When the wild animals got inside, they saw candy on every shelf, and the wild animals ate all that candy. But it wasn't enough for the greedy wild animals. They found the pot and said the magic words, "Candy pot, flip." The pot shivered and shook. It rattled and rolled. Then the pot hummed. It filled with candies of every kind and color. While the pot was filled up, the animals danced and chanted, "We want candy, we want a lot, from the shelves and from the pot." The candy bubbled over the top and the animals chanted, "We want candy, we want a lot, from the shelves and from the pot." The candy went onto the floor and still the animals chanted, "We want candy, we want a lot, from the shelves and from the pot." The candy on the floor got higher and higher. The animals were scared. They cried, "Candy pot, stop!" But it didn't stop. They cried, "Stop, pot, stop!" But it didn't stop. It kept coming and coming. Some of the candy piled onto the animals. It flowed out of the candy shop and onto the streets, and more covered the animals. It flowed into the park and into the castle. The wild animals were buried under the candy. Candy was everywhere in the kingdom. The king and queen had to do something, so the royal family went to the top of the castle and called for the warm, wonderful wizard, who was invisible. Even though they couldn't see the wizard, they trusted the wizard would help because that's what helpers do. In the meantime, the candy piled higher onto the wild animals. They couldn't eat their way out of the mountain of candy that sat on their backs. They needed help, and help came. The warm, wonderful wizard called the people of Magic. They returned to the candy shop and they said, candy, pot, flop. The pot stopped making candy. Everyone from the whole kingdom ate
All that candy.
The wild animals were finally freed from the mountain of candy and they helped to eat
All that candy.
The wild animals thanked everyone for saving them, and from that day forth they learned to ask for things that satisfied, need not greed. The royal family had a party to celebrate. They invited everyone, including the wild animals, said they were welcome to the kingdom from now on. The party was fun. The snakes slithered, the bunnies hopped, the guard dogs barked, children played, pigs snorted, fairies, elves, trolls, and gnomes danced, and the wild animals hooted and howled with joy. Everyone was happy, including the more wonderful wizard, who was
Invisible.
And that's the second story. Thank you, Mrs. Dunlop's class. Take a bow, Mrs. Dunlop's class. Okay, so now Mrs. Dunlop's class will get off the stage, and then Mrs.